So, thanks, Bane and Link, for joining again for the session. The topic of the day is Hell Rush. I think maybe to preface a little bit, when I was playing the public beta, because I was not invited to the private beta, but the public beta, Hell Rush hadn't been enabled yet. They just had the daily challenges. They just had the 2 covenants, Covenant 0 and Covenant 1. And I remember watching the first time that Mark showed off Hell Rush and was actually like really, really impressed that they had designed something around a multiplayer. It wasn't PvP. I mean, it was PvP, but it was PvP in a very different style than I'd seen in a game like this before. So I've played quite a lot of it. I was really excited, before when it came out. It was one of the first things that I got into when I got into the game. It's still something that I do up until now. But I'm curious, what were your guys' first impressions being and or playing Hell Rush in this game?
So, for me, my first impressions of Hell Rush were not that great, basically, because I didn't enjoy being pressured for time that much, and it seemed really difficult and it turned me off a bit early, so I avoided the mode for a while early on, and especially as much of my first impression from the game also came from the private beta. It turned out there weren't that many beta testers involved, so finding a Hell Rush to play with other players was very difficult. So for quite some time I would avoid the mode, so I only got into it relatively close to the release of the game when we did Hell Rushes with the developers and things like that. And then it got me hooked because I already had the experience with the single player mode, and the Hell Rush really expanded on that. And it is definitely a very unique mode, and I really did enjoy the different style quite a lot.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, Panic. Panic is exactly what I felt the very first time that I played Hell Rush. I was doing YouTube videos at that time, so that still exists up on YouTube. My gosh, does my performance look terrible by today's standards. I remember that I don't even think I beat... No, I did manage to beat Daedalus once on my first day of Hell Rush. It was an Awoken Hellhorn combination, which was the one that I, of course, playing in the beta as much as I had, was the one that I had the most experience with. So the other panic was that I actually did Hell Rush before I did Daily Challenge, and I hadn't even finished unlocking everything yet. So when I jumped into Hell Rush, and then suddenly it's like, here's this race, this clan that you haven't touched. Here's these cards that you have no idea what to do with. Enjoy. It was just incredibly stressful. I both hated it and I loved it. I come from like experience of playing like really high-end sort of like highly skilled gameplay in many games. So to play something that in a strategy game pressured me and made me feel uncomfortable and made me feel just feelings that I'm not used to feeling in a strategy game before was actually really refreshing. And so I very quickly fell in love, even if I was absolutely atrocious. And honestly, to this day, still aren't that great at it.
To your comment, first time I played Melting Remnant was in Hell Rush. So I played Hell Rush, Melting Remnant, I think it was Melting Remnant Awoken, and I had seen Melting Remnant cards from watching some videos on YouTube of the private beta. Never played it. and did just absolutely atrocious in that run, trying to sort out how reform was working, how all this burnout was working. It was a nightmare to sort that all out in a 3-minute time during the first few battles is stressful. All right, so now I think we've had a lot of experience. What would you say to someone who maybe like Link looks at Hellrush and says, it's really stressful, seems a lot of pressure, I don't know if it's something that I could do or am interested in. What would you tell someone who's maybe hesitant to jump into Hellrush, or maybe he's only tried it once or twice and had a not so great experience? What would you tell them as a, give it another shot, try it out? What would be your selling point to them? I play Hellrush over or alongside some of the other modes in the game.
I figured Sally could be the one taking that.
Don't have
hard sell.
an answer just ready just yet, so.
All right, I can
you're
try
fine.
and field that, I suppose. If I was to be asked that, I think my answer to that would be Hellrush is a fantastic, phenomenal way to learn about unexpected card combinations. Because when your brain is moving so quickly, because you've got to make these snap decisions, you find that you play something usually wrongly. But sometimes that wrong play creates a combination that you hadn't thought about before. So a lot of my bizarre plays that people have seen me play in daily challenges come from things that I only learned because I played them in Hellrush, and I had a card and I had an interaction and I had 10 seconds left on that timer, and I was like, if I don't make this interaction, it doesn't work, then this is all busted anyway, so let's just give it a shot. And that's how I've stumbled across like some of my more interesting plays.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think things like that have happened to me before as well. I had Hell Rushes where I was like, let's give this a shot. Let's try to make this work, and I just go with it. Like no second guesses, because there's no time for that, and you just jump in and try, and that way sometimes you discover new things. That's definitely a good selling point of Hellrush. I can agree with that. For me personally, it's also kind of the competitive feeling of Hellrush. I really enjoy the close head-on-head matches you can have. I think for me that's a great feeling. I know that's not for everyone, but I am a pretty competitive player, and Hellrush does tickle that itch for me. That's definitely yeah.
Talking about interesting days, one of the weirdest ones that I did, and I featured this in one of my interaction streams, but I was playing as Stygian Awoken, and I had a large stoned, the name right now, it's the Frostbite Revenge tank, the Titan Sentry, right?
Titan Sentry seems correct, yeah.
Titan Sentry. And I was fighting against the boss, and it was the top floor, and I knew I was going to lose. I did something stupid. I used a sharpen on the boss. Turns out that revenge triggers happen off of spikes, and buffed his frostbite enough that it killed him. Weirdest thing I'd ever done, because the boss was doing 13 damage per hit, and spikes were only doing 2 damage per hit, so I could get a lot more frostbite with the spike damage than I could with just pure getting hit retaliation. Hey, Cinis.
Hi, Cinis.
All right, hey y'all. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yep.
Am I intervening on discussion too much, or have you?
No, it's
No,
fine.
I'll
Now's
just
the perfect
continue.
time.
I'll continue. You're just fine.
Okay.
Anyway, so yeah, to the point, yeah, like getting a weird combination like that when you have 10 seconds to play something and see if it works, it really does push you. Oftentimes, it just to complete failure, but occasionally, seeing something that works in a way that you hadn't ever tried or thought of trying before. So, definitely would agree with that. Then to the second point about competitiveness, that's really it for me. Like this is. I have this love-hate relationship with my competitiveness. It gets me to play games far longer than I ever should. I almost 2,000 hours into League of Legends can attest to having a love-hate relationship with competitiveness, having to finally kill off some games just so that I have sanity. And Hell Rush, the nice thing, I guess the nice and negative thing right now is that Hell Rush isn't ranked, so I can play it for the moment of competitiveness without getting any angry or feeling resentful about losing matches, which is okay. And I also like. Go ahead.
I was just curious if you do you get those feelings when you play Daily Challenge? Since we had Daily Challenge last week.
But I do to a certain extent, but it's not at the same level because I feel like a lot of times. It's not every time, but a lot of times the choices that lead to success in Daily Challenge are unpredictable, right? Like it's not like I chose a path that didn't get me the unit that everybody else who was in the top score got. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, that happens, right? You choose a path and it doesn't work out.
Yep.
And I feel like most of the time, the top players tend to make very similar gambles. And then it's more about execution. And I feel like, and for the most part, if my execution's bad, it's on me and I know it. And if it's not on execution, it's really on I picked the wrong path. And it's like, okay, whatever. I roll, it rolls over and you move on. I don't usually get so.
It feels more personal, rather than the Daily Challenge feels more on your decision making, large scale grand strategy, your plan for the run, whereas Hell Rush is more about execution. Can you keep a cool head in the face of the timer and play well to get out your score? And in Hell Rush, you can usually pinpoint specific places where you personally screwed up the play if you are too slow or if you lose otherwise.
Absolutely, I can very much agree to that.
And I think that's part of what I love and hate about Hell Rush, and that execution becomes much more critical. And it's we talked about this in the Daily Challenge, and Bane, you mentioned this, that you would like to have this iron mode, right? That you can't allow retries and things like that. And Hell Rush, you can't, right? You're in it, and there's no retrying battles. I'm not even positive if you can. If you exit, if you abandon,
if you leave, you die.
You can.
Done.
Yep.
It is already an iron mode setup, and I've had a couple of daily challenges where the first turn, I put something down and immediately regret it, and went, okay, I'm gonna go. It's I haven't even clicked end turn once. I'm gonna go retry it. It's fine. Rush, you can't do that. You screw up your first placement, and you have to live with it.
Yep.
And that's why I say I love and hate it. There's no room for error because there's no undo buttons in this game.
It's much like the alt lands run.
I wouldn't
Very
say
similar to the alt lands run.
I wouldn't say there is no room for error. I mean, you can basically everyone makes some mistakes in some ways, and you can get away with some amount of mistakes in a Hell Rush usually, and still be fine. So.
What I find really interesting, sorry to tackle on that as well, is that, I mean, yeah, I make a lot of mistakes when I do play Hell Rush. In fact, the ones that I did today was, after Silent went to bed, was full of mistakes. But the thing is that you can still do them and eke out a win if the other person isn't. It's not so much that they're making more mistakes than you, it's that because of the choices that they've made. They either have a more complex deck that requires more decision making, which requires more time, which is one of the unique things about Hell Rush, having to think about that time investment. But also, to go even further back in the conversation, that feeling of getting a victory, a close victory that you get from Hell Rush is like nothing else in the game or in any game that I've really played, because I've had, I think, like a 15-point victory in one game where I was trailing behind right up until that last fight. And that feeling to just get that like last little bit of points to just cross over that line, that's something that like I just can't explain any more than it's like the few times that I've ever fist pumped on stream, right? So yeah.
I think that's what's also a little bit different than the daily challenge, right? In the daily challenge, you do get to see where at least current players are at different levels, right? You can see, okay, what's their score at floor or at 6th or 5th or 4th ring or whatever. It's different in Hell Rush. It's very different because unlike with daily challenge, unless literally some of the top players are playing at the same time, those reference points are meaningless, but they're not. I don't really care. In Hell Rush, you absolutely care. You care about those reference points every time.
Because in the daily challenge, after you're done, you can see your opponent's run summaries, which is something you can't do in Hell Rush. And if you go so far as to make a scouting account or do something ridiculously cheesy like that, and I expect there are at least a couple people who do that. I don't think anyone here does. You can even see before you go in, but Hell Rush, you have no way of knowing, aside from guessing by their padding, what the opponents are doing.
It's always, I find one of most satisfying moments as well is like, you'll be building out a route, right? And a player that you've been more or less paired with, every single floor you're within just a few points of each other, and you're going the same routes, and then you do that split route, and you flip something that's like either a draft that's like, okay, that's it, like we're no longer paired anymore.
And then the reverse is true. Like if you immediately see it pay off, it's a great feeling. But then if they make it past and you die, or the reverse of that, if you make it past and they die, it's like, oh, all right then.
And I would also say, now flipping over maybe some things that I struggle with Hell Rush, and I would say it's very similar to parts of my experience also speedrunning the game. There are some cards that I just hate and will not take. In Hell Rush, I won't take them in speedruns, clearly, but I hate them because of their animations. Spike of Awoken Spike is one of the worst cards in this game if you do Hell Rush. It is absolutely atrocious in terms of animation speed. And as much as I love the card and take it often when I'm playing in standard Covenant 25 runs or in daily challenges, I will avoid that card like the plague because it stresses me out to watch that animation. And there are certain other cards as well that I now, over time, have experience with, just because I know that the animation speed is going to frustrate me, even if it is best in choice. I don't know if you guys have that same level of OCD that I do, but at least for me, I have a few choice cards that, again, even if they are the best pick, I avoid them simply because it stresses me to watch them animate in the middle of a run.
Oh, that's some lighting. Nothing very impressive there. For me, as a speedrunner, I just tend to avoid those cards, although I will say I have had one instance of successfully taking and using Awoken's Rail Spike in a speedrun. But that animation scares me to the point where I do indeed avoid it, in general. I'm definitely that OCD about it.
Okay, for me it's a bit different. I haven't ever tried speedrunning Monster Train, and I probably don't think I ever will. So I don't really have that same feeling towards these cards, although I had a run recently where there was a card that had a very slow animation that really made me almost time out, and I don't quite remember what it was. I don't think it was a Woken Railspike, but it was something similar. Maybe it was Gifts for a Guard, or I'm not quite sure what it was, but it definitely had a very slow animation, and I just managed to play my game-winning card on the last second before the timer ran out, and that made me a little anxious, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think the only cards that I avoid are generally it has to be like if I'm playing like a Woken Umbra or something like that. Not a Woken Umbra, a Melting Remnant and Umbra as a combination. I will often avoid certain play styles, which means avoiding certain cards altogether. Yes, because of their slow animation. In fact, the return, I forget the name of the card, I'm really bad with them. The return 2 cards, reform 2 cards randomly, consumable card.
Sacred Wicks.
Yeah, that's the one. The animation for that is like ultra slow, especially if the resulting units also do buffs and stuff. Like, so it can just be incredibly slow, and that does lead to me avoiding those cards specifically for that purpose.
Then I would say in general, we could transition into this. When you're playing Hell Rush, what are some unique considerations you take in Hell Rush that you wouldn't take in others? And maybe I would start with this to say I really struggle with any type of Gorge builds. Just from my I don't know what it is about Gorge. I mean, clearly there's more interaction, right? You're having to play morsel generators, play morsels, and so on. It's like my central processor as well. Like the time to play, the time per action also slows down, so it's compounded. I don't know that I have won a successful pure Gorge-based Hell Rush, just because, again, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about playing morsels, but I way overthink it, and I die to timer almost every time I'm doing Gorge builds.
I will say that's also probably because Shade Splitter, which is the driving card for Gorge builds, has a hideously slow animation in which it generates the morsel. I think it's probably by far the slowest basic card, and slower than most commons. So it adds up, I bet. But I tend to eschew Gorge builds as well when I'm playing Hell Rush. And I also tend to avoid, although I'm learning more and more that this is actually a bad idea as I'm speedrunning, I also tend to avoid when I'm playing Awoken builds that rely heavily on regen.
How come?
So for me, I just today had a Hell Rush where I lost to the timer eventually, and I was playing a Nimp reform build. So Remnant was my main clan, Hellhound my secondary clan, and there was a fight where I just took too long because I think it was Fell with the Scorches, and managing the Scorches and the Imps just took me too long. In the other battles, I could just eventually go off with reforming my Transcend Imp over and over again, and I didn't need to think anymore, because what happened was that I was growing so much power that it didn't really matter. The execution didn't really matter all that much anymore, because eventually my Transcend Imp was giving me 45 armor and like 15 rage every time I played it, and that was more than enough to win every fight. And then suddenly with the Scorchfell, I had the trouble that I wasn't able to play all my imps first, and then I had to optimize the execution, and that eventually cost me the game because I ran out of time. So reform decks are definitely decks that for me are very difficult to play on Hell Rush. Not impossible. I had great reform builds on Hell Rush before that won, but whenever I play Reform, I definitely have to remind myself to play it very quickly, make decisions split second, and sometimes that also screws me over because then the boss enters when my units are at 1 burnout and die after the first round, so I lose a lot of points because the boss ascends and things like that. But yeah. Gorge builds, I do agree, they are also pretty hard to play effectively in Hell Rush because they do take up a lot of time.
So in terms of unique considerations that I take, that I don't want to just double up things that I've said before or that others have spoken about. So some of the unique considerations that I think about are I will hit on timer just slightly. The timer element means that I will take considerations where if I have run out of time but still killed the boss and still been fine, there's this consideration that I need to select my rewards as quickly as possible because I am currently in time debt. And that time debt is just going to continue to accrue if I take more time making those reward choices. That's going to give me less time to make choices on the map. Similarly, when I'm in time bonus, i.e. when I complete a match with a minute to spare, I will go and I will have a look at the map. And from the map, I'll make the decisions about, okay, where will I be going in future rounds? So that way, if I am in time debt by that point, I already have a plan in mind for where I want to go. And that allows me to save just a little bit of time. And sometimes those 2 or 3 seconds are those 2 and 3 seconds that you need to complete a match successfully. The other considerations that I take that aren't time related are based on basically the ease of use. So I guess it is sort of time related. Like, I will almost always take the trample champion over any of the others for Umbra. And the reason why I do that is because I can just plonk it down and ignore it. It doesn't require micromanagement. It doesn't require anything else. I know that as long as I can keep it alive, it will be successful where it is. That means that it frees up my brain, for one thing. It frees up my processing power to micromanage elsewhere. Those are the times where I can play a Gorge build successfully because I can put a Gorge lifesteal on the middle floor with a morsel maker and stuff like that and just go for it. But these things aren't as possible if I don't have some large core unit that doesn't require much thinking.
One thing I started doing recently with Hell Rushes is I skip almost every time Concealed Cavern on Ring 7 and oftentimes on Ring 5. As a time compared to benefit, right? Like, Concealed Caverns, of course, you can get, like, stuff. But in my experience, Ring 7 barely is worth it, and it's often where I lose. Usually don't lose to Seraph, actually. Seraph I'm usually fine with. It's usually Daedalus, Fel, or Floor 7. I lose. Floor 7 has the most spawns of any non-flying boss, so you already are at a time pressure just due to the number of battles in their rounds in that fight. And as I said, so I typically just skip it. If I end up going the route with the Concealed Cavern, I skip it almost every time now. Other, I would say, kind of different consideration is I never try to play 3 floors. And oftentimes in others, I'll have 3, I would say, dedicated floors or intentional floors. I end up doing oftentimes in Hell Rush is have 2 floors and a dump floor. So a dump floor for anything else that I just need to get out of my deck, like Train Stewards or Dregs or whatever else I don't need. I have that as a dump floor, and then I focus on 2 floors. Because, again, my processor cannot, my brain processor struggles to manage 3 floors effectively. I've learned I just can't do it. If I'm at enough draft units to fill up 2 floors, I don't take another one, even if it's great. But just because I know I can't manage 3 floors effectively, and it will slow me down because I will try. So it's interesting, at least some of my things that I've been adopting over time. Maybe let's go into, so the developers mentioned that in the, and I think if you guys are in the private test server of the game, or have the test copy of the game, the next version, you have flexible time if you do custom hell rushes. So question group, do you feel like the current time limit is the right sweet spot for Hell Rush? Or would you think it should be slightly longer or slightly shorter? And what would be your reasoning, or should it change at all? What's your thoughts?
I mean, I am in no way a representative sample of the Monster Train community. But the last time I played a full 30-minute Hell Rush, it felt like a walk in the park compared to what I normally do, which is because I mostly speedrun this game. So again, not representative at all, but I look forward to using the lower time limit Hell Rush if anyone wishes to play it.
I think the current time limit is in a pretty good spot. It does leave you, I feel, enough time to make decisions and to play decks that are a little bit slower, require a little bit more micromanagement. But on the other hand, it does punish you if you do take too long, if you do have extremely heavy micromanagement decks. So I think it's not in a bad place that right now. My playstyle is certainly entirely different from Cinis, and I often tend to play somewhat micromanagement heavy decks because I do enjoy these, and I very often do these in Hell Rush as well. So I'm definitely not gonna use a shorter timer on the Hell Rush. Maybe I will try a little bit longer one if that's possible, but then again I often play Hell Rush because it does go very quickly and you can do a full game of Hell Rush in half an hour. So probably I will stay with the timer as is.
And
So I'm
don't
sure-
get me wrong here, sorry. Oh, go ahead.
No, please go for it.
Okay. And don't get me wrong here, I do think from like a game design perspective, 30 minutes is a pretty good spot, only like minor adjustments up and down, if any. But I do think I personally like the flexibility that's going to be implemented, and I hope people do use it, but I won't mind if it's just 30 minutes. That is a perfectly workable time.
So for me, I think that, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about ideal changes a little bit further on, as we often do on State of the Game. But the thing that I think is that the timer is pretty much spot on most of the time. I mean, it's called Hell Rush, Rush being part of the name, so it's designed to make the average player feel pressured. I certainly feel pressured even now, and I imagine many other people do. I do feel like it's probably requiring too much scripting, but a more dynamic timer for when you do have a clan where it is just more micro-intensive, like your Melting Remnant and your Umbra. Like if you got a slight, we're talking very slight amount of additional time to make up for the fact that those clans are stereotypically more time-intensive, you don't get a choice in what clan the game gives you, so you could have that, and I feel like that wouldn't be badly received by the community.
I was thinking about that as well, is whether there should be an adaptable timer based on clan selection. And I would assume this would have to be based on data that are collected by the developers to see what are failure rates for different clans compared to others and so on, that maybe they could make adaptations. I also don't know if that then creates confusion in the community, like, hey, this time I had 3 minutes, this time I had 3:20, this time I had it's 50, why is it You know, I don't know. Also, don't know if it, and maybe I'm wrong here, but it's the same. You get the same for every floor too, or every ring, right? You don't get. It's not dynamic per ring.
No, you do get different amounts per ring.
Yeah,
You get
it's
different amounts
dynamic
per
per ring. Yeah, definitely.
I think in
I'm not paying-
particular it's flying bosses that get more time. Is that right?
Flying bosses definitely feel to me like they get more time.
I definitely feel like I still get more time on ring 7 as well. Maybe even ring 5. I'm not sure.
Should check that in the next game because I haven't deliberately looked at how much time do you get each time. I just focus on quick decision
Same.
making. Often to my own failure. But, okay. And I would say, yeah, I would like the idea of a little bit more dynamic if they can make it work. That is relatively, I don't know, relatively easy to understand. And I don't. I mean, probably most players are like me, where the focus is not on the timer until it gets quite low. Maybe then I'll give my first only feedback, but first feedback around what would I like to see as the next evolution of Hell Rush, apart from some large scale ones, just some minor things. And one of them is exactly that. I think the warning time is too late. I think it could be pushed earlier.
Yeah.
When you're down to 10 seconds, it's not really enough to have a decision. I wouldn't mind if there was some kind of indicator at 1 minute and then a second indicator at 10 seconds. I think this would be really helpful it's helpful for me because that's often that time, that last minute seems to be when I get lost in the sauce. It's right around that time that things start to get quite complex. You're having either the first relentless floor or you're about to get to your first relentless floor. And for me, that's oftentimes, I get a little lost. So would be at least my first minor feedback, but let me give it to you guys. What are some, and let's start with more of like the minor changes that you would have hoped that they could make in the next few updates, for example.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can definitely agree with that. I would like the warning a little bit earlier than 10 seconds, maybe at 30 seconds, or as you said, a minute. Those would be good marks for maybe first and the second warning for time. That's because very often when you see 10 seconds left, I need to make my play now, and then you play maybe you play like a molder to get the right unit back, and sometimes you just are a little bit too slow with that or something like that, and 10 seconds is just not quite enough. Other than that, I don't really see anything off the top of I can't really think of anything off the top of my head that I would change about Hell Rush. I think it's a great mode otherwise.
My one minor complaint, and I'm interested to hear all of your thoughts on this because I'm not really sure it's universal, is that I'm personally find waiting after you have like a time bonus rather than being able to go to things like merchants before you start the battle in the next round. Being able to see the path and choose one but not actually execute it, a little bit annoying. Just because it forces you to sit there rather than like plan your strategy out for the next battle. Again, I'm not sure this should be implemented. It's just a personal complaint of mine, honestly.
Yeah,
What do y'all
I agree with that. The waiting, basically the two major things that I wanted to, the two minor things that I wanted to sort of bring up were, one was timer. Like, please give me a little bit of noise at 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, and then the loud noise at 10 seconds. Just a little one, just a tiny little, just a noise that just sounds slightly different. It doesn't need to be loud, doesn't need to be crazy. It just needs to be a little reminder to go on in my ear to be like, you're playing Hell Rush, Bane. You're playing Hell Rush. You need to start actually making decisions now, and you need to do them quickly. Just that would be enough. Okay, that's fantastic. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, which is exactly what's already been brought up, is that wait time. Like if everyone finishes a match and we've still got a minute left on the clock, please pop something up on the screen that goes, all participants have finished their matches. Would you like to move on to the next phase? Like, maybe not with the letting me go and look through stuff, because yeah, I get that. That's kind of nice. I like it. I don't know if I like it or dislike it. It's interesting. I've never really thought about the idea of being able to start the next sort of choices early. I don't know if it's too advantageous for people who are quick and it doesn't allow for people who are slower but maybe a little bit more tactical to catch up. So I can't really make a statement there, but I definitely think that once everyone has finished their matches, we should be able to move on to the next timer without having to wait there for a minute.
Yep, that's also something I thought about, and it's just you. Personally, it feels bad to just not do anything, right? To just sit and wait. Nice. And I don't know what can be done to avoid that. I think your suggestion, Bane, makes a lot of sense. Just have everyone offer. Is everyone okay to move on? And then if so, yes. Early choices could be interesting. I don't know. It's more like, for me, I want to be at least actively doing something and not just watching a timer down. So definitely would appreciate something there. I don't know what the solution is, but something that allows me to get more active engagement in the game would be beneficial during those times. And it's not every time. It's usually early floors only. Later floors, I don't seem to have. So, maybe I'll have like 20 seconds or something. Depends on the deck. But I would say something like that helps alleviate some of the downtime would be helpful. And then I'm going to now go into some of the big ones, and let's tackle them one at a time because they are quite fundamental changes, and I think they're ones that are pretty universally brought up. One of them I'll already mention, which the devs clarified that they don't have in the foreseeable future a solution, which is the spectator mode. So basically, they confirmed was not the art stream, but the stream before. They confirmed there's no intention to add spectator mode. They discussed it quite heavily, but at this point, they said the game is not designed for it, and to add it in would have to fundamentally change the base code, which is too much for them to do. So is there anyone who wants to give any type of mourning expression or express their feelings around knowing that we're not going to get spectate mode? That was one of my top, right? Like, I would love to be able to, especially after loss, be able to spectate.
What
In lieu of...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
What I personally would wonder, and I haven't asked the devs about this yet, is whether it would be possible to have the Hell Rushes be, I guess, seeded in a way, like have a share code a la custom challenges and have other people's run summaries be viewable after, and also to make the seed replayable. I think if they can accomplish that, that would be a pretty good substitute and have additional benefits over and above spectator mode would have. But again, I'm not sure if it's code feasible.
And I would add to that, this would be the at least close to spectate mode, is if that seed could update after every round closes. If you lost, you could go to the seed overview and it would show current round, and you could see what people's builds were at that moment in real time. That would be like as close to spectate mode without actually being spectate mode. But I think to your point, Cinis, is that feasible? No idea.
No idea. I mean, I think it should be feasible because, like, if we think about it, we have our run summaries. So, and those run summaries are generated very, very quickly at the end of a daily challenge or at the end of anything. They're generated exceedingly quickly. So I don't foresee it being too much more additional overhead to allow players to see the run summary from the last tier, so from the last combat point, basically. Because yeah, I would love to, while I'm sitting in the lobby and I've died, I would love to be able to be like, oh, this guy who beat me, how did he beat me? Like, I'd love to find out. I'd love to click on that name and just be able to be like, oh, just like in Daily Challenge, like, oh, this is how. I'd also like to see, this kind of jumps on that Daily Challenge we spoke about briefly, the ability to see the choices that others made. So being able to see which path they took through the train. Just little bits like that. Just allow me to click on someone and just see some cool stuff, please. Because that will allow me to be like, oh, this guy, he's thinking on another level. If I start seeing him in the future, I'm going to have to be on my like A game if I'm going to be playing against him. And that will actually feed into the choices that I make in a Hell Rush battle.
Yeah, I can completely agree with that. I have oftentimes wished that I could look at what deck other players built. Oftentimes, when it's a close game and I lose, or sometimes even if I win, if it was a close game, I'm interested in seeing the other player's deck. What set our decks apart? What choices did he make? I definitely agree with that. That would be very nice to have.
Here's my controversial question, because this guy actually got brought up on your video of the state of the game cell link on YouTube. Someone had commented that this type of information is really only sought out by the top tier elite group and nobody else cares. I don't agree with that. I think most players would like to have an overview of how the other players did. Maybe I'm projecting onto them. I feel like that is a very common thing to, after you're done, after you've lost or you've won, to just do a quick sweep over what did everybody do.
Yeah, I think that's probably more relevant in Hell Rush than for things like daily challenges.
Oh, we lost him.
We lost.
There we go.
Okay, he's returned.
Okay, I think it's
I'm
more
back in.
relevant even in Hell Rushes than in Daily Challenge, just because there is a direct competition between a small group of players instead of just everybody that's playing the challenge competing for the same leaderboard. I think these are very different things, and I can imagine that most people that actually play Hell Rush would be interested in seeing how the other players did.
I have anecdotally seen a bunch of people request something like that. So as for the elitism, quote-unquote, part of it, I don't think that's there. My sample may be off.
Yeah,
Maybe
I was
I'm
about to say
misrepresenting
the
that quote. I don't know. I don't know if you got the same interpretation from that comment that I did, Cell Link, that all this extra information, all this stuff would only be for a handful. I think most people would at least appreciate this. I don't know that they would want level Bane. We discussed in the daily challenge last time, this like stats, who took what. Like maybe that's maybe too heavy for all other users. But I think most people would like, at least with Hell Rush, to get that same, at least what we get out of daily challenge.
I think the way to see that, though, is, so, I mean, I come from a design thinking background. So in design thinking, you always user-centric first, get data from your users, right? And that's what Monster Train, like the team, the devs behind Monster Train do, is they're collecting a bunch of data. But at no point currently do they sample their user base with some basic questions. So, I mean, this is something that, we could ask the devs if they're cool with us, like, asking the community, because there's no harm in, like, I mean, sure, we don't need the permission to go and start up a Reddit thread or something like that, or put something on the Discord, but it's difficult for us because, honestly, all four of us are high-tier players. And yes, we do have our viewerships, and our viewerships also kind of feel similarly to the way we do about things, but that doesn't make them the average necessarily. So, I mean, we should probably survey users and find out, like, I mean, is this something that people want, or is it something that just the high-tier players want? But if the high-tier players are the content creators, and it's the content creators that sell copies of your game, then
something definitely to consider. But we talk about spectate mode. The other significantly requested is ranked Hell Rush. And question then, do you feel like a ranked Hell Rush makes sense? Is it competitive enough that having a full and I don't think there is a heavy matchmaking behind. At least my experience seems to say it's whoever's in the pool gets in the pool.
Yep.
But so the question would be, would you welcome a ranked Hell Rush mode? Do you think that the mode justifies having any type of ranking or matchmaking?
I'm not so sure about that. I think it would be nice to have, but it might appeal to a relatively small amount of players. I do kind of miss it sometimes. Sometimes I have hell rushes where everyone dies at Daedalus, and I just feel like I didn't get to play the game. So it would be nice to have some kind of matchmaking or ranking. That would definitely help with this issue, but I am not so sure if that's a thing that's really should really be a priority. Let's say it that way. It would definitely be a good thing to have, but maybe there are sort of things that require attention before that can be implemented.
So my thoughts on this matter are that ranked Hell Rush specifically, and I know this is a concern of the devs as well, just would dilute the player base to the point that getting a full 8-person group together would be hard, especially for those who play on off-peak times. But I would be interested in seeing some form of more competitive, quote-unquote, high-tier Hell Rush, like a weekly Hell Rush tournament series, or something that could also be used to generate hype for the game itself.
Yeah,
So that'd be good for content creation. Sorry.
Okay, let me throw in real quickly here. There was a community Hell Rush tournament relatively early after the game came out. I think it was in the first or second week after the game came out. There was a Hell Rush tournament, and I did participate in it, and it was amazing. I think something like that could really be very, very fun, especially for the competitive players out there like us. And it was also done very well, so it had a great great caster who commented, and things like that can be really fun, and I would love to see more Hell Rush tournament kind of events.
Yeah, so I mean, I spoke about this briefly last week, and I said that last week wasn't the right time for me to bring this up. So I said I'd bring it up in Hell Rush, and well, here we are. On the topic of ranked versus ranked and matchmaking, I don't feel like matchmaking probably ever needs to exist in Hell Rush unless the game gets like insanely crazy large. Which I mean, I hope it does, but if it doesn't, then we don't need matchmaking. That's fairly straightforward. I would love, in terms of rankings, I just would love to be able to click on my friends' profiles and see how they did in their last 10 Hell Rushes. I'd like to see their log like I can see my log. It's just not something I can do. Even a win-loss percentage or something like that. Like, I don't even know how you would do it, but just something that allows me to see that. I don't really care personally about how well I'm doing in comparison to other players who I play Hell Rush with, even when I play with them regularly. The thing that I would like to see is more competitive Hell Rush, and that's what we've just been discussing. And the way that we get more competitive Hell Rush is unfortunately by not playing Hell Rush. There needs to, in my opinion, to get an evergreen game, there needs to be an additional game mode. The additional game mode still uses elements of both Hell Rush and Daily Challenge together. You get your mutators from Daily Challenge. You have your slower timer as well. So only a little bit, so that way it's like 55 minutes. So a 55-minute timer, say, instead of a 30-minute. I know that's really terrible for you, Cinis, I'm sorry. But we need to appeal to we need to appeal to a slightly larger array of people, and you do this hourly. Okay, every hour on the hour there is a hell rush. It has a leaderboard. It's 55-minute hell rush. You've then got 5 minutes to go do your bio breaks, to go do everything else. You get your mutators, so that way everything is delicious and wonderful and fun. And then you have a leaderboard that is valid for that run. That's everything everyone wants. You've got your evergreen content. Your content creators have something that they know that they can tackle every hour. It's constant playthrough. And when people leave a game of Hell Rush, maybe they bomb out in the first 2 rounds of this mode, then they can go jump in a normal Hell Rush. And because it's timed, just like a normal Hell Rush, you're going to get a whole bunch of people wanting to queue up for Hell Rush at the same time. So you're going to get those nice big lobbies as well. So I think it's going to work pretty well, something like that. But getting that suggestion to the devs might be difficult.
And one problem I see with a mode like that is that it would be even harder to find people for normal Hell Rushes, and there are certain times where it can be hard. I very rarely get to see a lobby with more than 3 or 4 people in it. So I think that would take people away from the normal Hell Rushes as well. So I'm not sure if that might be a problem with that.
It's possible, for sure.
Maybe an alternative could be in the vein of what the devs are already planning, which is having some of the custom challenges of popularity. So you can see some of the most popular ones, and then you could have community-driven Hell Rushes, Hell Rush-based seeds. And then you can see not against 8 players, but maybe against 50 players who did this Hell Rush the best out of 50 players, or even more players. And that could also be really cool. Is a daily challenge-esque Hell Rush, and hopefully something like that doesn't dilute too much. This is the big problem when you have a player base that's less than 1 million, and I don't think still estimates that I'm seeing is I just haven't said, but somewhere between 100 and 200,000 copies have been sold. What I've seen, and so when you have a player base that, and I think on average Steam, you're seeing numbers around 4,000 to 5,000 people on average are playing the game at any given time. Diluting that 4,000 to 5,000 players is a real problem. If you're having game modes that require lots of players at the same time.
Sure, but we're
having
also...
things like what?
Oh no, I was just saying we're also getting that dilution in the new patch, so...
A little bit. Yeah, you're right. But hopefully, the ideal is that the player base grows enough that dilution becomes less of a concern. I know even with bigger games, League of Legends was really nervous to talk about different rank modes, and they had tens of millions, hundreds of millions, I don't know hundreds of millions, but they had a significantly higher player base. They were still also very concerned about diluting their player base. I think it is something that becomes difficult. It may be that you have to retire one to bring in the other in an attempt to try to get more participation. We are about at an hour. I like to try to keep this to an hour. Any final comments around Hell Rush or around suggestions before we end this discussion?
Okay, I'll leave with one, I guess. I was just going to suggest, my only suggestion for this discussion is that we all now jump in a Hell Rush together and smash one out.
I'm happy to do it. I was going to offer as well, so appreciate you.
Also,
That works for everybody.
Sure, I'm up to it.
Probably would like to turn off the video.
No, that's fine. I'm gonna also switch back to normal stream. I'll send out if it's all right for the one. I'll create a quick rush. Do you care if I add any mutators?
No, please go.
Do what you want.
No?
Right.
Why not?
Right. I will set up a quick one and message you all, and then instead of doing it via Discord, I think we just do it in separate streams. But I'll send that to you shortly.
And I'll
good.
record my
Sounds
ass
great.
if I'm not streaming yet.
All right, thanks, guys. Really appreciate the discussion. I think at least things that we've been talking about have been the kinds of things I've been seeing when in discussions with Hell Rush. So I think at least some of the player base is aligned with a lot of our comments. I don't know that all of them are, but at least some are. I definitely know that it's top of mind for the developers to try to encourage more participation in the various modes. So I'm curious to see their solutions, probably even better than what we've discussed, as ways to encourage that participation. And yeah, so thanks again for this State of the Game discussion. Next week is probably going to be the Covenant grind. So discussing the Covenant grind in Monster Train. In preparation for the patch, which is coming. So, let me know who wants to participate next week, and I'll organize it. And thanks again.
Thanks very much.
See you guys in a minute on Hell Rush.